The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to be able to follow the member, and hopefully I'll be able to fill in the blanks that he has in some of the conversation about the Environmental Reporting Bill. The purpose of the bill is, if I can just quote out of the general policy statement, is to create a national level environmental reporting system to ensure that reporting on our environment occurs on a regular basis and can be trusted by the public as independent, fair and accurate. I have no doubt that the Minister's intention is to deliver on that policy statement. I understand that she thinks that this will deliver on it. I think that's her intention. I don't think she would have signed off a general policy statement that said such a clear vision about public reporting if she didn't believe that it would happen through this legislation. And I know that some of my colleagues will say, well, that's not what other people say about her. And I know that's true. Got people like Guy Salmon, who's a strong contributor to the blue-green space in the National Party, was quoted on television saying that Amy Adams is the first Minister for the Environment who has taken environmental standards backwards, first ever Minister for the Environment. That was a pretty hard line, actually, from a strong National Party person. So leaving that aside, I don't believe that that is the intention of either the Minister or the legislation. And I support the purpose of the bill. The difficulty that I have and the reason that Labor is voting against this legislation at this stage is that reading through the details of the legislation, I don't believe that it delivers on that purpose. This is occasionally the case. Generally, the purpose is what determines the voting of a party on an issue. But in this case, if you read through the specifics of the legislation, it's weak. It leaves itself quite open to political manipulation. It doesn't have the robustness or the clarity that we would expect to deliver the vision, which is good. Independent, fair and accurate reporting on the state of the environment is hardly an objective that anybody could argue against. If the targets aren't in the primary legislation, how can we as a parliament have the confidence in the independence of those targets? Well, actually, we can't. The Minister said, well, we'll deal with that in regulation. We've been tricked before, actually, by that approach, and there is no reason at all, if you're talking about a State of the Environment report which the whole of Parliament should support, there is no reason at all to not have the targets in the primary legislation. It would make sense. It's very interesting that there are some targets in the primary legislation, including the economic benefits. Why in an environmental reporting bill would the economic benefits be determined as a target in the primary legislation, but the actual environmental standards be left up to regulation? That is a real puzzle, and I hope that the Select Committee deliberation enlightens us as to how the Minister came to the economic benefits in environmental reporting being so important as to warrant inclusion in the primary legislation, but other targets don't warrant being included in the primary legislation. The Minister should speak up. She's already apologised to me once today. There were very few things that have given me such pleasure. It's on the public record. I heard her. I've even tweeted it. Of course, it was on the behalf of the Minister, Jerry Brownlee, who suddenly had urgent public business to attend to somewhere else and left it up. He announced a winter heating program for Christchurch. That was very good. He left it up to his poor, hapless Associate Minister to apologise on his behalf. So what the problem with this legislation is that it's not clear that it can deliver on the vision, and it certainly has some confusion about why there would be targets like economic benefits in the primary legislation, but there wouldn't be environmental legislations. There are other confusions that are made even more puzzling by the lack of clarity in the legislation. For example, if we're going to have the independence and accountability to the public as mentioned, when we're talking about water quality, is the standard that's going to be reported to the public on a regular basis, as was mentioned by the Minister and by the Honourable Phil Heatley in his contribution, is that going to be on individual waterways, or is it going to be on an average across the whole country? That actually makes a huge difference as to whether it means a toss or not, whether it means anything at all, or whether it is just a spin document to make the Minister of the time look good. And frankly, regardless of which party's leading the government, I don't have any time for that sort of approach. We should have a whole of Parliament consensus about what the targets are, how they are measured, and then get agreement so that the trends and the accountability and our progress on the environment, because I'm sure everyone wants to make progress on environmental standards, can be very clear. It has long been a practice of this Parliament, and I'm a little surprised that the Minister, who is a pretty well-regarded lawyer, has not seen the tradition of this Parliament as appropriate for this legislation, and that approach is to have as much as possible in the primary legislation and as little as needed in regulation. So again, why would that approach be taken in something that requires targets to be independent and consistent? So our side will be proposing strongly at the committee, and I have no doubt there will be a large number of submissions along the same lines, that the targets are debated and agreed and included in the primary legislation. Then, if a minister in the future says that target's not looking too good, I think we're getting into a bit of bother here. The minister would have to come back to Parliament to have that target changed, not quietly change it in regulation, so that when some less than favourable reporting was due, it wouldn't come to the public's attention. So that will be one of the things that we are looking at to have changed in this. Mr. Speaker, as I said at the beginning, nobody could argue with the approach that I think the Minister's committed to, and that is, for the first time, to have in legislation a national level environmental reporting system that is independent, fair and accurate. So the principle of this legislation, the vision of it, is well supported by Labor. What we don't believe, what we don't have confidence in, is whether this legislation in its current drafting is able to deliver on that vision. It leaves us very vulnerable to political manipulation. It leaves us vulnerable to the Minister of the time, and I'm not accusing the current Minister of having this as an intent at all. I don't think she has. But it leaves a vulnerability which we could use this opportunity to remove, to ensure that the targets are in the primary legislation, that they are agreed by the whole of Parliament. They are the things that we as representatives of our communities think are important. It should, if we are going to have independent reporting, then it should be reporting to Parliament, and it should be on the targets that are agreed by Parliament. There is a tendency of ministers to set targets which they know in the future won't be problematic politically, and I can understand individual politicians' vulnerabilities on those points, but it's not a robust process for independent reporting. It's not an accountability that would be to Parliament. It would be an accountability to the political party that's leading the government of the time. This is long-term stuff we are talking about here. We're not talking about short-term measures. When you're talking about environmental standards, it often takes a long time to change a particular standard, and consistency in both the standards that are being measured, the monitoring and then the reporting is the most critical thing, so that we as a whole Parliament can look at the trend and say, well, clearly we're doing the right thing, we're heading in the right direction, or if we're not, we would as a Parliament determine action that was appropriate to address that. So I think this is an issue where the debate is something that New Zealand is up to. New Zealanders care passionately about their environment. I know that New Zealanders will want to see the independence, the robustness and the accountability that this legislation could deliver. It's actually something that's been missing on our legislative frame for some time, and I want to commend the Minister for picking it up. She's done a good job in that I agree with the vision. I don't think that this legislation will deliver it, but hopefully changes that Select Committee will allow us to support it in the future.
I call Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Pleased to take a call for the Green Party on the Environmental Reporting Bill.